You are surrounded by fools, and it is consuming you. You believe your intelligence is your greatest asset. It is actually your most dangerous vulnerability. The modern world instructs you to educate the ignorant, to deploy logic to establish common ground. Arthur Schopenhauer understood the brutal truth long before the rest of the world was ready to hear it. Logic is completely defenseless against stupidity. Explaining your mind to a fool is not a noble act. It is intellectual suicide. There exists a concealed, almost ruthless architecture to neutralizing the willfully ignorant. A method the most formidable minds in history employed to disarm fools without ever granting them the gift of the truth. Once you grasp this mechanism, you will never be depleted by a lesser mind again. You recognize the ache. You are seated in a room, perhaps a boardroom, a family gathering, or a digital battleground, listening to someone speak with absolute, unshakable certainty about something they fundamentally misunderstand. You sense the pressure mounting in your chest. Your mind instantly maps every flaw in their reasoning. You assemble your evidence. You prepare your case. You lay it out with precision, fully expecting the light of reason to wash across their expression. Instead, they regard you blankly. They blink. And then they double down on their original absurd position. You exit the exchange completely depleted, your energy eroded, privately questioning your own sanity. Why does this keep happening? Why do you consistently lose when you are objectively correct? Because you are ensnared in the intelligence trap. You are projecting your own operating system onto a machine that is architecturally incapable of running it. Subscribe to Carl Jung Psychology right now if you have ever walked away from a conversation feeling more confused than when you entered it. What you are about to understand will permanently alter the way you navigate every interaction with every person who has ever drained your mental reserves. Intelligent people operate under a fatal delusion, the conviction that the rest of the world genuinely values the truth. You assume that if you simply present the correct evidence, the other person will examine it, recalibrate their perspective, and align with your conclusion. Schopenhauer despised this naive optimism with remarkable intensity. In his incisive text, The Art of Being Right, he articulated a dark, unyielding law of human nature. People do not argue to discover truth. They argue to establish dominance. Psychology labels this the Dunning-Krueger effect, the cognitive bias through which people of limited ability maintain a hallucinatory degree of confidence in their own competence. But simply understanding the graph is insufficient. You must comprehend the full gravity of it. Ignorance is not a passive condition. It is an active, heavily armored defense mechanism. When you introduce logic to a fool, they do not perceive an opportunity for growth. They perceive a direct threat to their ego. And the human ego will incinerate the entire world before it concedes that it was wrong. Daniel Kahneman, in Thinking Fast and Slow, divided the mind into System 1 and System 2. System 1 is rapid, emotional, and instinctual. System 2 is deliberate, measured, and analytical. Foolish people are prisoners of System 1. They inhabit it completely. They experience an emotion, attach a swift opinion to it, and declare it a fact. You, the intelligent person, are attempting to engage them through System 2. You are presenting nuance. You are offering data. It is a translation error of the most fundamental kind. You are speaking advanced mathematics to a creature that only responds to stimulus and reaction. You are performing precision surgery with a hammer. Worse still, you are doing all the labor. You are expending enormous cognitive energy constructing a perfectly reasoned argument, while they are investing zero energy simply refusing to receive it. They do not drain you by outsmarting you. They drain you by outlasting you. They pull you downward into the dense, exhausting mud of their own cognitive limitations. Schopenhauer identified this dynamic 2 centuries ago. He concluded that truth carries absolutely no currency in a confrontation with a fool. So what is the path forward? If logic fails and reasoning is itself a snare, how do you prevail? You do not fight them. You weaponize their own momentum against them. Schopenhauer understood that the intellect is a servant to the will. The will, that blind, irrational, emotional force driving every human being, always triumphs in the end. When you argue with a fool, you are providing them with the precise thing they are seeking: friction. Friction makes them feel significant. Your visible frustration confirms to them that they matter. Every time you counter their position, you legitimize their delusion. You are communicating, "Your idea is worthy of my time and my emotional investment." To neutralize a fool, you must deny them friction entirely. How? By employing Schopenhauer's most devastating strategic approach. Do not oppose them. Agree with them, but agree so completely, so thoroughly, so enthusiastically, that you propel their argument directly into the territory of pure absurdity. In philosophy, this is closely related to reductio ad absurdum. In the practical domain of psychological strategy, it is simply placing sufficient rope in a man's hands for him to construct his own undoing. Picture a colleague who insists that all contemporary art is a fraud and that any person alive could produce a masterpiece. The reflex of an intelligent person is to invoke technique, art history, and the complexity of subjective expression. Resist that reflex entirely. Instead, lean forward, nod deliberately. "You are absolutely right," you say. "In fact, since it requires so little skill, we should resign from our positions this afternoon. We will acquire paint supplies today. You will handle the canvases. I will locate the gallery. We will be financially independent by the end of the week. Why are we even sitting in this building?" Observe what happens to their expression. You have not challenged them. You have validated their premise with total sincerity, but you have accelerated it forward to its logical, catastrophic destination. The fool operates exclusively on the surface. They never project 3 moves ahead. When you force them to confront the endpoint of their own reasoning, their mental process short-circuits. They are compelled to reverse position. They are suddenly forced to inject qualifications. They begin arguing against themselves to preserve the appearance of coherence. You did not defeat them with your superior logic. You defeated them with the raw material of their own stupidity. Schopenhauer deployed this approach without mercy against his academic adversaries. He did not extend the courtesy of serious intellectual engagement to individuals he regarded as charlatans. He did not treat their propositions as equals deserving of measured debate. He amplified their deficiencies until those deficiencies became impossible to take seriously. When you operate this way, you preserve your own energy completely. You exit the ring. You become the observer, watching a child repeatedly trip over their own shoelaces with a kind of quiet, detached curiosity. But this demands a profound and uncomfortable shift in your own psychology. You must extinguish the part of your ego that desperately requires external recognition of its correctness. Intelligent people are genuinely addicted to being acknowledged as right. You pursue the satisfaction of hearing the other person concede the point. You want the moral confirmation. Schopenhauer would inform you directly that seeking validation from a fool is itself the most sophisticated form of stupidity available to you. Why does it matter whether a diminished mind acknowledges your capacity? Why do you require a blind man's opinion of your painting? When you release the compulsive need to be vindicated in the eyes of someone incapable of accurate judgment, you become entirely immune to their provocations. You stop handing them the remote control to your nervous system. Allow them their incorrect beliefs. Allow them to navigate the world carrying their distorted maps. It is not your responsibility to rescue them. It is your responsibility to protect yourself from the damage they cause. If what you are hearing right now is landing with the weight of genuine recognition, if you can identify the specific people in your life who have been consuming your intelligence for years, drop the number 11 in the comments below. In the study of quantum consciousness and the psychology of awakening that Carl Jung psychology explores regularly, 11 is recognized as the precise numerical signature of a mind that has reached a threshold. The point at which continued unconscious participation in patterns that diminish you becomes impossible. If you are standing at that threshold right now, mark it. You may find that others in this community are standing at the exact same crossing. This leads us to a darker but more necessary recognition. Stupidity is not a passive trait. It is highly contagious. If you invest sufficient time attempting to navigate the chaotic, irrational interior landscape of a foolish person's mind, you will begin to compromise your own. Cognitive load theory establishes that our mental bandwidth is strictly finite. When you engage with a highly irrational individual, your brain operates at maximum capacity. You are attempting to anticipate their unpredictable reactions. You are suppressing your own mounting frustration. You are walking across a surface covered in invisible tripwires. This sustained cognitive taxation progressively erodes your own decision-making quality. You grow irritable. You begin making poor judgments. You forfeit your creative edge. You are permitting a psychological parasite to feed on your intellectual capital. Schopenhauer was notoriously solitary. His contemporaries labeled him a misanthrope. They claimed he despised humanity. But read The Wisdom of Life carefully. He did not despise humanity. He was simply ruthless about governing his mental environment. He formulated what became known as the porcupine dilemma. On a frigid winter night, porcupines gather together for warmth, but their quills pierce each other, forcing them apart. They are trapped in the tension between freezing in isolation and bleeding in proximity. The intelligent person must master this precise calibration of distance. You cannot eliminate stupid people from your existence entirely. They occupy positions above you, beside you, within your family structure, within your social circle. But you must establish a psychological quarantine. When interaction is unavoidable, you do not bring your authentic self to the exchange. You send an avatar. The avatar is courteous. The avatar produces appropriate expressions. The avatar communicates in brief, non-committal phrases. That's an interesting perspective. I can see where you're coming from. There may be something to that. The avatar offers nothing that can be used as ammunition. The avatar functions as a mirror, reflecting their noise directly back at them, while your actual mind remains secure behind a carefully maintained wall of detachment. You are physically present. You are intellectually elsewhere. They will be entirely convinced they are having a meaningful conversation with you. They will believe they are prevailing. Allow them the illusion. The illusion of triumph is the least expensive gift you can extend to a fool in exchange for your own uninterrupted peace. Feel the discomfort arising? The cultural conditioning informing you that this approach is manipulative, that viewing others through this lens reflects arrogance? Dissolve that discomfort. That guilt is precisely the mechanism responsible for your suffering. You have been extending the treatment appropriate for genuine intellectual peers to people who function as predators on your cognitive resources. A foolish person who aggressively enforces their own ignorance on the surrounding environment is not an innocent party. They constitute a genuine hazard. David Robson, in The Intelligence Trap, documents how institutional stupidity, the phenomenon of intelligent people following the confidently wrong herd, has caused aviation disasters, economic collapses, and catastrophic medical failures. Stupidity carries real consequences. You owe it neither your vulnerability nor your energy. You must regard their ignorance as you regard a force of nature. You do not debate a hurricane. You do not attempt to reason with a flood. You reinforce the windows. You seek elevated ground, and you allow the storm to exhaust its own energy. But what happens when the fool possesses authority over you? What is the strategy when the irrational mind approves your compensation or controls access to your advancement? How do you endure when the system itself rewards the most vocal idiot in any given room? This requires an entirely different category of tools. The most dangerous creature is not the apex predator. It is the frightened animal wearing a crown. When a person of limited intellectual capacity acquires institutional power, their entire psychological architecture rests on a fault line of deep, unacknowledged insecurity. They sense at a primal level that they are intellectually outmatched by the minds surrounding them. They do not process this awareness as motivation to develop themselves. They process it as a direct threat to their survival. If you enter their territory and demonstrate your capacity openly, you are not establishing your value. You are holding a mirror directly up to their inadequacy. And a fool wielding power will shatter the mirror rather than examine the reflection. Schopenhauer articulated this dynamic with characteristic bluntness. To display conspicuous intelligence or outstanding ability in the presence of mediocrity is an unpardonable transgression. The mediocre mind registers something close to physical discomfort in proximity to genuine greatness. It activates a deep, concealed form of hostility. They will not challenge your intelligence directly. That would require openly acknowledging it exists. They will attack your character instead. You will be described as difficult, uncooperative, or insufficiently collaborative. They will leverage the bureaucratic infrastructure of the institution to erode you systematically. You cannot win an open confrontation in someone else's domain. You must outmaneuver them entirely. Consider the historical record of Sima Yi. He was arguably the most brilliant military strategist of his era. Yet he found himself operating beneath Cao Shuang, a regent of tremendous institutional power and breathtaking intellectual limitation. Cao Shuang was arrogant, impulsive, and profoundly threatened by Sima Yi's evident capability. Open challenge would result in execution. Direct argument would produce immediate destruction. So Sima Yi executed what may be the most effective and humiliating strategic maneuver in the entire history of documented warfare: the submission gambit. He feigned complete physical and mental deterioration. When Cao Shuang dispatched informants to assess his condition, Sima Yi performed the role of a dying, helpless elderly man with total commitment. He allowed his soup to spill deliberately across his clothing. He affected an inability to hear. He confused names and dates. He presented as entirely broken. The informant reported this assessment to Cao Shuang. The foolish regent responded with laughter. He experienced superiority. He felt entirely secure. He ceased to regard Sima Yi as any form of threat and reduced his vigilance accordingly. The fool's ego had been thoroughly satisfied. Months later, while Cao Shuang had departed on an extended hunting expedition, Sima Yi abandoned the performance. He rose from his alleged deathbed, executed a precise and devastating military coup, and assumed control of the entire empire. Cao Shuang lost his position and ultimately his life because he accepted the illusion at face value. Sima Yi had grasped something you must internalize completely. Your intelligence is not an insignia displayed on your exterior. It is a concealed instrument. You do not present a concealed instrument publicly for the admiration of observers. You maintain its concealment until the precise moment it becomes necessary. When navigating a powerful fool, provide them the exact emotional sustenance they are perpetually starved for, the sensation of superiority. Solicit their guidance on inconsequential matters. Allow them to make corrections on trivial, irrelevant points. Express gratitude for their perspective. You are not capitulating. You are administering a sedative. You are delivering exactly enough validation to their ego to render them entirely non-threatening, freeing you to operate with complete autonomy in the spaces they are no longer monitoring. You exchange a momentary reduction in your pride for absolute, unhindered freedom of movement. The intelligence of this exchange becomes apparent only in retrospect, when you have achieved your objective and they remain entirely convinced they directed the outcome. There exists a specific category of exhaustion that emerges from the sustained effort of translating complex reality for a simplified mind. You construct diagrams, you develop analogies, you systematically reduce the concept to its most fundamental components, and they continue to regard you with completely empty eyes before restating the identical flawed position they held 20 minutes prior. This is the architecture of the intelligence trap. You interpret their inability to comprehend as evidence of a failure in your method of communication. It is not. It reflects a fundamental limitation in their cognitive hardware. David Robson's research on cognitive bias reveals an uncomfortable truth that applies specifically to highly intelligent individuals. The belief that other people process information through the same mechanisms they employ. You think in probabilities. You evaluate evidence. You update your conclusions when new data emerges. The fool operates in absolutes. They arrive at a conclusion first, typically anchored in a visceral emotional response or tribal affiliation, and then systematically dismiss any incoming information that challenges it. Attempting to introduce nuance to this system is equivalent to installing contemporary software on a device that was not designed to run it. The architecture does not support the operation. The installation will always fail. So, eliminate the attempt entirely. Schopenhauer prescribed a complete departure from the instinctual drive to educate in his 38 stratagems. He constructed specific tactics for engaging opponents who are constitutionally immune to rational argument. Among his most effective techniques is the strategic deployment of irony. When a fool corners you with a demand for agreement on a ridiculous premise, do not contest the premise directly. Instead, respond, "What you are describing is so genuinely extraordinary that it far exceeds my modest capacity to fully grasp it. I must defer entirely to your superior judgment on this matter." The fool will expand visibly with satisfaction. They will interpret this as complete intellectual surrender. They will believe they have overwhelmed you with the force of their insight. But every person observing the exchange with any degree of perceptiveness will register the precision of the blade. You have delivered a devastating insult directly to their face, and they have responded by expressing gratitude. You have withdrawn from the field without expending a single calorie of genuine intellectual effort. Here is something worth sitting with. In frameworks that examine the intersection of consciousness, quantum field theory, and Jungian psychology, the territory Carl Jung psychology has been building into for years now, the number 520 appears repeatedly in models describing the frequency at which a system undergoes sudden reorganization from within. It is the numerical signature of a mind that has stopped investing its energy in what cannot be changed and redirected that energy entirely toward what can. If you have reached the point where you are genuinely ready to stop throwing your intellectual resources at people who will never receive them, leave 520 below. That single act of recognition may be more psychologically significant than it appears. You must develop a clear understanding of the economics of attention. Every hour allocated to debating a fool is an hour extracted from the construction of your own future. It is cognitive energy diverted away from your actual objectives, your financial development, your physical vitality. Fools function as energy vampires of the most insidious variety. They do not generate, they extract. They draw you into endless circular exchanges because they have nothing more valuable to do with their time. Your time carries significant weight. Their time is effectively weightless. When you engage in these exchanges, you are conducting a transaction that converts your gold into their dirt. Terminate the transaction. Walk away. Allow them the belief that they prevailed. The lion does not sacrifice sleep over the assessments of sheep. We must now address the most uncomfortable dimension of your psychology. The reason you continue engaging with them despite the consistent cost. It is not exclusively about the need to be correct. It is because you feel a form of responsibility toward them. You tell yourself, if I can simply help them perceive the truth, their circumstances will improve. If I can identify the flaw in their logic, they will be spared from a costly error. This is the arrogance concealed within empathy. You have appointed yourself the designated rescuer of the cognitively limited. You are attempting to fulfill a role that was never yours to occupy. Krueger and Dunning's landmark 1999 research revealed what may be the darkest irony embedded in human psychology. The precise skills required to demonstrate genuine competence in any domain are the exact same skills required to recognize competence when you encounter it. Therefore, the profoundly incompetent lack the metacognitive capacity to perceive their own incompetence. They are secured inside a fortress of unearned confidence, completely unable to detect the deficits that are visible to everyone surrounding them. You cannot liberate them from that fortress. They are not seeking liberation. The fortress provides them warmth, familiarity, and protection from the terrifying complexity of a world they are not equipped to navigate accurately. When you attempt to drag them forcibly into the harsh clarity of reality, you are not performing the function of a guide or a healer. You are functioning as an invader, and they will resist you with the full ferocity of a creature defending the only territory it has ever known. Observe the individuals in your immediate environment. The chronically financially unstable acquaintance who refuses to alter their spending patterns but argues passionately about macroeconomic policy. The disruptive family member who generates constant interpersonal chaos while maintaining that every other person involved is the source of the problem. How many years have you committed to applying logic in an attempt to shift their trajectory? How many hours of rest have you forfeited? They have not shifted a single degree, but you have accumulated visible wear. You have developed a layer of cynicism that was not previously there. The investment of your empathy has been funding the perpetuation of their delusion. Schopenhauer was unsparing in his assessment of human developmental potential. He concluded that fundamental character is immutable. Human beings do not restructure their nature. They adjust their external circumstances while the underlying architecture remains identical. If a person operates as a fool in this period of their life, they will operate as a fool in the next. Accepting this reality is genuinely painful. It demands a form of emotional surgery. You must examine certain people you may care for or people you are professionally required to engage with and arrive at a clear-eyed acceptance of their permanent cognitive limitations. You stop attempting to upgrade them. You begin managing them, the way experienced professionals manage complex, unpredictable machinery. You maintain a respectful distance from the moving components. You remain positioned behind the established safety margins. You expect the system to perform exactly as its original design permits. When the machine malfunctions, you do not enter into a debate with it about its performance. You remove yourself from the immediate blast radius. What becomes available to you when you finally cease fighting them? When you release the rope, stop providing explanations, and simply observe the activity around you without inserting yourself into it as a participant. You experience a shift that is both disorienting and deeply clarifying. You become aware of how much of your constructed identity was tied to occupying the position of the most capable mind in any given room. You recognize how substantially you depended on the friction of these engagements to generate a sense of purpose and momentum. When that friction is no longer available, you are returned to yourself entirely. This is the genuine test. Most intelligent people deliberately maintain environments populated by lesser minds. They do so because it requires no courage. It is uncomplicated to appear exceptional when the surrounding standard is minimal. It is a sophisticated psychological dependency. Schopenhauer cautioned with considerable emphasis that a mind of genuine depth that voluntarily immerses itself in the company of the vulgar will eventually be drawn down to the level it inhabits. The mind adapts continuously to the environment it occupies most frequently. If your daily existence is consumed by arguments about inconsequential matters, your mind will contract to fit the dimensions of those arguments. You must withdraw, not through physical removal from society, but through a deliberate, maintained psychological and emotional separation. You must develop genuine comfort with being chronically misunderstood. Fools will misread your distance. They will characterize you as arrogant. They will observe that you have changed. They will interpret your refusal to engage as evidence of weakness or defeat. Allow all of it to pass without resistance. Their assessment is constructed on a premise that was incorrect from the beginning. Why should a judgment originating in a distorted mind carry any weight in the interior life of a clear one? Imagine moving through an institution that houses individuals with severely disordered perception of reality. The residents point toward you and declare that you are the one who is confused. Do you pause to present your credentials? Do you produce documentation to establish your clarity? No. You continue moving through the space. You understand that their perception of reality has been compromised. The broader world operates as a considerably larger version of that institution. The principle remains precisely identical. When a fool delivers an insult in your direction, it does not function as a genuine insult. It functions as a misdiagnosis delivered by someone unqualified to make the assessment. When they reject your proposition, It is not a failure of your proposition. It is confirmation that the proposition operates at a level beyond what they are equipped to access. This quality of sustained detachment is not emotional coldness. It is absolute perceptual clarity. It is the comprehensive understanding that your cognitive and emotional energy constitutes a finite, non-renewable resource. And every unit of that resource committed to someone who has dedicated themselves to their own limitation is a unit permanently diverted from your actual potential. We have spent centuries constructing a cultural mythology around the act of debate. We elevate the image of the intellectual combatant standing at the center of public discourse, systematically dismantling their adversary through the application of superior logic and precise rhetorical skill. But examine those confrontations closely. Nothing is ever genuinely resolved. The opponent never actually yields. The audience affirms the position they already occupied before the exchange began. It is performance. It is theater constructed for the purpose of generating applause. The truly effective minds do not perform for applause. They operate for outcomes. If you are committed to genuine effectiveness, if you intend to become truly unshakable in your navigation of a world dominated by irrationality, you must abandon the theater entirely. You must adopt the operating framework of an architect working in a building occupied by unsupervised children. You do not request permission from the children to proceed with the construction. You do not explain the load-bearing mathematics of the structural elements to them. You provide them with something sufficiently distracting to hold their attention, and you pour the foundation while they are oriented elsewhere. You accept the world precisely as it presents itself, governed primarily by irrationality, powered by emotional response, and fundamentally hostile to truth as an organizing principle. You do not register complaints about this reality. You do not expend resources attempting to reform it. You learn to navigate it with the same calm efficiency that a skilled sailor develops toward unpredictable weather. When you understand that people operate from ego, you use their ego as a navigational instrument. When you recognize that they are inaccessible to logic, you employ their emotional responses as the steering mechanism. When you perceive that they are starved for validation, you provide precisely enough to maintain their cooperative orientation. You become the invisible architecture of the situation. They experience themselves as the primary decision makers. They believe they hold the direction of events. But every choice available to them exists within parameters you quietly constructed in advance. This is the full transition from raw intelligence to applied power. Intelligence is the capacity to know you are correct. Power is the complete absence of need for them to know it. Intelligence is prevailing in the argument. Power is securing the objective while they remain convinced they won the exchange. You arrived at this video because you were exhausted. You were depleted from sustained friction, from the endless circular exchanges, from the private conviction that you were gradually losing your grip on sanity while attempting to introduce reason into an environment constitutionally resistant to it. You believed the resolution was a more effective argument, a sharper set of facts, a more persuasive delivery. Now you possess the actual framework. The resolution is surrender. Not surrender to them, surrender of your compulsive need to transform them. The instant you release the desire to be understood by minds that are structurally incapable of understanding, the weight lifts. The depletion dissolves. You observe them speaking and, in the place of frustration, you experience a quality of calm, clinical detachment. You witness the cognitive biases operating in real time. You observe the Dunning-Krueger effect as a live demonstration. You perceive the fragile ego executing its defensive protocols. It becomes entirely predictable. And what is reliably predictable can be reliably managed. You are no longer an active participant in their disorder. You are its observer. This is the precise form of psychological liberation that Carl Jung pursued throughout his career. Not the avoidance of the difficult, but the capacity to witness it from a position of internal sovereignty without being consumed by it. This is the cold, precise clarity that produces genuine freedom. You will never again sustain damage from a fool because you will never again extend to them the authority to assess your reality. Your intelligence is no longer a resource committed to their development. It is a precise instrument dedicated exclusively to your own elevation. Maintain its edge, maintain its concealment, and deploy it only in the service of your actual ascent. Leave 777 in the comments if this reached you. In both the Jungian framework of individuation and the quantum field models of coherent self-organization, 777 marks the frequency of a mind that has completed a fundamental internal reorientation. The transition from reactive engagement to sovereign observation. If you feel that transition occurring right now, in real time, as you process what this video has laid out, mark it below. The Carl Jung psychology community is built from people who have arrived at exactly this recognition. That shared acknowledgement is its own form of the collective unconscious Jung identified. Individual minds discovering that their private realizations are part of a far larger pattern. Subscribe to Carl Jung Psychology. Share this with someone whose intelligence is currently being consumed by people who don't deserve it. And we will see you in the next one.